Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Black Women's Wellness Podcast. I'm Deja Love, and this is a podcast where we amplify Black women's voices as we discuss ways that we manage stress and maintain our wellness. We want to ensure that all Black women live productive, meaningful, and robust lives unhinged by stress. The goal is not to perpetuate the myth of perfection, but to show progress by engaging in conversations with the diversity of Black women and hear stories about how they keep their wellness and manage stress. This is an authentic podcast by authentic women, and we are excited that you are listening to today's episode. So continue to subscribe, like, comment, and let's get into the episode. Today, I am really excited. I say this every time, but I'm excited to get in today's episode. We are joined by a special guest. I mean, every guest is special, but this is our first international guest. So you heard it here first. The Black Women's Wellness Podcast is global. And we are welcoming Camara Chambers. Camara, welcome. How are you today?
I'm great, thank you. Thank you for having me. Also, I'm happy to be the first international person on the podcast. That feels like a pretty big accolade to have.
It is. You have transcended our reach and we are global. So really excited to have you in this episode, which is, Camara will introduce herself, but we're going to talk about how a Black woman, Camara, and she's based in Toronto, she created a hiking group for wellness. And so we'll get into that. Camara, how's your day going? How are you?
It's going great. It's going great. I'm not feeling stressed, thankfully.
Good.
I'm feeling really good, but I've been taking lots of active measures to look after my mental health since the new year. So I'm feeling pretty good.
Oh, that's good. That's wonderful. We're going to jump right in as we always do. And we start asking every guest this question. Amidst the busyness, 2023 for a lot of us, not all, has been a ramp up. It's been a very rapid start. So how do you maintain your own wellness amidst the busyness and all that you have going on, especially with everything that's happening globally?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. That's something I think about so often in my life because I do have a lot going on. I work full time at a university in Toronto. I have a business, an investment property business. I run Let's Hike T.O. I'm getting married in a few months' time. And so it's felt just recently like everything's been building up to a bit of a peak of hecticness. Mm-hmm. But I think I've really been intentional about how I spend my downtime. Mm-hmm. So just really thinking about doing activities that bring me joy personally. So getting outside is one of them. But also I find it really relaxing to do yoga. So I've been trying to do yoga. I treat myself to a class a couple times a week. I've been really thinking about who I choose to spend time with as well, just in terms of preserving my energy and not doing any activities that tend to drain me. So I've been intentional about who I spend time with and the friends and family I speak to. And then I've also just been realistic with myself, recognizing I definitely can't do everything all at once. And so I've really tried to step back and prioritize the things that matter most to me, which for me, number one is really my mental health, and then just doing things that truly bring me joy.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. Has that always been the case for you? Because you sound very grounded, like you're like mental health and everything else trickles from that.
No, it hasn't been the case for me usually. I think, to be honest, I've hit rock bottom before. There was a time it's happened a couple of times, but there was a time last year, it was last spring, where I just had so much going on in my life. Work was really hectic and we were understaffed. Let's Hike T.O was taking off and we had a shortage of volunteers and I was just doing so much. And there was just this one evening where my stress levels were so high, I couldn't sleep. I wasn't eating properly and I was just consistently worrying. And I think what I learned from that experience is, number one, before it gets to that stage, there are a number of things I probably could have done ahead of time, but usually once it gets to that point, it's really hard to then pick yourself up.
Right.
Myself, for me to pick myself up and to really get myself out of it. So I powered through, but I thought to myself, I'm never going to be in this situation again. Like, I promised myself that I'll do what I need to do, whether it's saying no more, or being more of an advocate for myself in the workplace to make sure I really take on as much as I can do. Those are the things I was beginning to think about to avoid those periods of intense stress.
Right. Wow, I appreciate you sharing that. I think that's very common for a lot of us as Black women, that we're ambitious, we're overachievers, and we put on a lot. And I think, especially during this pandemic, it's really shifted the paradigm, and many of us are challenging this indoctrination that we have been led to believe about, just this overproductivity. I'm reading Trisha Hersey's book, Rest is Resistance, and it's just amazing, this fundamental paradigm that we have believed, that humans are machines, and that if you're not productive, that you're not adding value. And so to hear that and I appreciate you sharing, you hit rock bottom, and many of us hit rock bottom multiple times, and you've been really building yourself back up. I think that's it's a common through line of a lot of us, of just this just constant trying to challenge the notion. And to hear from you, you mentioned you're in Toronto, formerly you're from London, to hear that ethos seems to transcend geographic location. Sometimes in the US, it's like we're taught, okay, it's just, other places have balance and it's not the same. So to hear from you, it's really interesting. And I welcome hearing a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think every country has their way of thinking about like rest and wellness. Coming from England, I was born and raised in London. I found there it's a very hectic lifestyle, but people also, I think they work hard, but they play hard. People take their vacation days, they go traveling tons. In London, it's really typical to have 5 weeks vacation plus, the statutory holidays, the public holidays. And I found people really made the most of that. Whereas moving here to Canada, and ironically, I moved to Toronto because I wanted a slow pace of life. I wanted to have a relaxing experience and a relaxing lifestyle, which most Canadians laugh at because Toronto is by far the biggest city in the country. Yeah. And to anyone outside Toronto, they think of Toronto as this really cold, unfriendly, busy place. But for me, coming from a major city in London, like I found Toronto actually quite relaxing and quite slow. But there's a different idea of wellness here, and I found that stopping and taking breaks and even taking a day off sick when you're sick isn't always the case here. So even as a manager in my work, I try to role model that, just in terms of logging off when we're meant to be logging off, and taking time when I'm sick to recover. There was something I heard recently where someone said that they were talking about therapy as a way of kind of recuperating. And they said often people think of therapy as reconstructive surgery after something bad has happened, as a way of rebuilding yourself. But we should be looking at therapy as like a precaution, like you'd wear a helmet if you were cycling, or you'd wear your seatbelt if you were driving. And I thought that was a great point, but I also thought that's really what self-care should be. We shouldn't be doing self-care once we're at the point where we're completely burnt out, barely think. Or for me, when I was like huddled in bed, wide awake at like 2 a.m., ideally you'd be doing it before things get too difficult.
Right. Yeah. Oh, definitely. And I know this is such a whole topic because, especially based in the US, and you think about our healthcare system, which here it is, though folks are challenging it, it has not historically been a preventative model. It's been a model of treatment, not really embracing prevention. And again, here in the US, we're told, especially in the UK and a place like Canada, that health outcomes are a little bit longer than the US, and maybe, maternal mortality, the crisis that we have here, specifically for Black birthing persons, is not the same. But to hear you mentioning that, folks are, and I know we're speaking high level, there are always exceptions. There's still this constant work mode. it's really interesting to hear that.
Yeah, I definitely think it exists. I think the US is fascinating just because of your healthcare system. I know there's a lot of inequity in it. Canada is funny because our healthcare system is partially funded. And so there
Mm-hmm.
are certain services you can get access to free, but even going to the doctors, often it's a long wait time, and getting access to a doctor and a family doctor can be very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think moving to Canada from England, if I'm honest, I really now feel privileged to have come from England, having experienced it where, it's a pretty much fully funded healthcare system. And throughout your life, you have access to that, which I think a lot of people took for granted because it's not perfect.
Right, right. Yeah. So let's step back a little bit because we can definitely talk more about this. But as you moved to Toronto, an idea was birthed and you wanted to create a hiking group. Tell me what motivated you in 2021 to start this group? And I know it's open, it's not just for Black people, but for you to be, you said you lived in Toronto for about 12 years now, but to create this group, how, one, did that idea start? And then two, tell us, how is it going and how is it being received?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, to tell you the story, I have to go back a little bit. So,
Mm-hmm.
uh, as a person, so I'm Jamaican by heritage,
Okay.
British born and raised, and then I'm now a Canadian citizen. And so, growing up in London to Jamaican parents, we were not an outdoorsy family. So we were not
Okay.
the weekend going camping. We were not going to the park every weekend. We like the whole idea of like being outdoors was really limited to the walk from our house to the bus stop and back. It wasn't really much more than that. And so when I moved to Toronto for that slower pace of life that I mentioned, I still consider myself very much a big city girl. I wasn't really into the outdoors and I'd never really had a chance to explore it.
Mm.
And then about a year or so into moving here, a colleague of mine suggested that I try hiking. And she told me about a local hiking club that she had been part of for many years. And she suggested that I come along hiking. So I was open to it. In my first year of moving, I promised myself that I would say yes to everything anyone asked me to do. And so I said yes. And I went on this hike and I completely fell in love with the experience. The
Mm.
idea that I could be out in the woods with this group of people, really out in nature, breathing in fresh air, listening to
Mhm.
like the birds and just kind of hearing the relative silence that was around me. I just found it so relaxing and I adored it. And I knew I wanted to keep doing it.
Mhm.
Because it was so new to me. I was almost becoming addicted to the idea of going hiking and being out in nature. And
Mhm.
I think it was on my first or second hike. I was watching the hike leader lead, and it was this older man who was walking, he was leading the group, walking ahead. And I thought to myself, I could 100% do his job. Like, I don't
Mhm.
know what training he's got or how he got there, but it doesn't look that hard. I could definitely do that. And so I approached him and we had a conversation about how I could become a hike leader with that group. And so within a year, I'd gone through all the training. I'd become first aid certified, and I'd basically been trained on how to lead hikes. And so for about 7 or 8 years, I led hikes with that group. And I found that people really enjoyed it. They really enjoyed coming to my hikes. I was a little bit different for many reasons. I was one of, I think, only two Black hike leaders in
Mhm.
the hiking clubs, like over 100 volunteers who are hike leaders. I was one of the few Black ones.
Mhm.
Um, I led very fast-paced hikes because that's just my style of walking. I also love craft beer, which is a little bit odd, but I used to often lead hikes that would end at a craft brewery, which I think people really enjoyed just because it was a social activity afterwards. And I found my hike became more and more popular, and sometimes I had upwards of 80 people coming on my hikes.
Mhm.
Um, but as the time went by and I paid attention to who was coming, I started to notice a trend.
Mhm.
And I noticed that the people were typically Caucasian,
Mhm.
typically older, uh, typically had lived in Canada all their lives, so that were not newcomers. Um, and by far, I was one of the youngest people who was on my hikes. At that point, I was in my early 30s. So I don't think I was that young, but
Mhm.
compared to most people who are retirees, I was very conscious of the fact that we were reaching a much older demographic and not a very
Mhm.
diverse demographic. Now, bearing in mind, Toronto is one of the most multicultural cities in the world. And the stat is about 50% of people who live in Toronto were not born in Canada. And so I was very conscious that we were only meeting a specific demographic. And it got to the point where I started wondering about how we could change that. And I was taking a course. I was doing online course through Harvard University, actually. And the course was on community change and leadership. And we were tasked with this project of having to create community change locally. And so I thought, great, this is a great opportunity for me to go to my hiking club and make some change. And so I approached the president of the hiking club and a number of the hike leaders and the board, and asked each of them individually what they thought of the idea of trying to be a bit more inclusive, specifically just trying to bring younger people in, actually, people under the age of 40. And everyone said yes, except for the chair of the board, the president of the board. And he, in my conversation with him, expressed that he didn't think it was an issue. He made numerous assumptions about why younger people do not hike. And for me, by the end, I was conscious that we just weren't on the same page in terms of the idea of trying to really prioritize inclusivity. So after the series of conversations, I asked them formally, can I create like a committee or some kind of youth engagement group to get more younger people into this club? And they wrote back to me and said no, basically.
Wow.
Yeah, they felt like they were doing enough. They said they didn't want to overburden their volunteers. And it was quite clear that they were not willing to do anything or make any changes. And Deidre, I have to say, I was so angry.
I know. I'm holding back from hearing this story. I'm like...
I also thought it was a pretty small ask. I didn't think I was asking for anything revolutionary. I also specifically did not lead with trying to increase the racial diversity because I didn't want to be tokenized in any way. I was very, very angry. And after stewing on it for a while, I started to wonder, what if I just did it myself? What if I just created a community that would really prioritize including different people and people who weren't already represented in the hiking community here in Toronto? And so I brought a few friends together, people who loved hiking as much as I did, and they all agreed to get on board, and together we created Let's Hike T.O. So that was back in the spring of 2021. We started very small. We were a very grassrootsy group of like 4 people. Our aim was always just to see what happened. We just wanted to try it out. We expected, honestly, to probably do maybe 3 or 4 hikes a year, but we were intentional in terms of who we were reaching. And we really felt it was important to reach those who weren't already represented or included or invited to come hiking. And so we were specific about it being about BIPOC folks, so Black, Indigenous, people of color, newcomers to Toronto, and also young adults. So we specifically said under the age of 40, but just anyone who identifies as a young person, really. And we were open about the fact that anyone could come hiking, regardless of how they identify, even if they don't fit into those 3 groups. But we wanted to make sure that we were reaching out to those groups specifically. And so we had our first hike in July of 2021. There were 6 people on that hike. 4 of them were friends I'd forced to come along, who were only there because I said to them I'd buy them a drink at the end. And then 2 of them, I don't even know how they found us. I think they found us on Eventbrite. But that was the beginning. And it took off. We led over 100 hikes since then, had about 1,300 people come hiking with us. We now have a team. We're now an official nonprofit. We have a team of about 20 volunteer hike leaders who've trained. And over the past year, my aim has really been building the foundation for Let's Hike T.O. so it can continue past me, because I was conscious that if anything were to happen to me, I would still like it to continue. And so last year was all about training people and really finding a community of leaders who wanted to be involved in making it work behind the scenes. And And as of just recently, I've stepped down as the president of the board, but I'm still on the board and I still lead hikes, but I've handed over and trained other people to begin to continue the organization with me working in the background rather than being the forefront.
Right. Oh, that's amazing, Kamara. First, congratulations. That's huge. I have many questions for you on that. This is amazing. So first, you spoke of something that is really big. I feel there's this notion that gets perpetuated that Canadians, specifically folks from Toronto, because you mentioned the diversity, that Canadians cannot be racist. This is a notion that is really highly perpetuated because a lot of times, especially when you think about a Donald Trump occupying the Oval Office, a lot of people said, okay, what's the easiest exit? We're going to go to Canada. And there's a notion that, okay, Canada is a safer space. But what you just expressed with the Hike group and the reticence and the opposition of, again, you weren't asking for the sun, the moon, and the stars. You were just like, we need this to be a little bit more inclusive. And there was pushback from, as you said, the president. So can you speak to this, and maybe this is a false notion, want to hear from you that Canadians are much more open and progressive and inclusive, because what you just expressed, your experience is really the antithesis.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'll speak from my experience. So having lived in a few different countries, Canada is definitely the most inclusive country I've lived in. And particularly Toronto, which I think is just a very forward-thinking liberal city, it is a place where I think lots of marginalized groups feel safe. So whether you're LGBTQ, you're a person of color, if you're a refugee, I think a lot of people find safety in Toronto. However, racism, prejudice 100% exists, just like it does in other places in the world. I just find it tends to be less overt. So I think it's less, I don't think, I haven't experienced it really where people will be like calling me racist names or anything like that. But I do find that in Toronto, I have had harder situations or microaggressions that happen to me as a Black woman. Super simple one. My partner, soon to be husband, is white. And we have lived in our condo building I've lived there for like 6 years, and my partner has lived there for like maybe 2 or 3 years. There's been numerous times where I've walked in with takeout food and I've been stopped by the concierge and asked whether I'm an Uber Eats driver or a delivery person. That's never happened to my partner before.
Right.
Or another simple one at work. People don't assume that I'm management, and they'll assume that I'm a lot more junior than I am. Yeah. So those are the types of experiences I found. I also found it really significantly when I was renting and trying to find housing in the city. I really struggled for landlords or people to give me the chance to rent as a Black person in the city in a way that my white friends did not struggle.
Right.
And then I would say that I think outside of the city, I do find racism tends to exist more, whether it's people staring or making assumptions about me. I think it's there. And so I think I'd say compared to England, I definitely find Canada overall a lot more progressive and a lot less like anti-immigrant, and the views that people hold, I find a lot less problematic and offensive in Canada. But prejudice 100% exists. And I think a big part of that prejudice and discrimination comes out in our conversations around Indigenous people and what reconciliation looks like. And I think there's a real uncomfortableness there for Canadians. And it's not something Canadians speak about often, but it's a really important part of the history that I think is now being acknowledged. And the question is, how will we reconcile with Indigenous communities who we've hurt so much over the years?
Right. Oh, definitely. And for you, you have so much intersectionality. You mentioned, your family, Jamaican, though you've lived in England, UK, and now you're Canadian, but you have this intersectional lens that adds much more nuance to wherever you occupy. So how does, your Jamaican heritage infuse into being in Toronto, and then, backtracking when you were in London, a place that is, very exclusive, compared to, Toronto, which is a little bit more inclusive, but still, as you articulated, the same racism that exists?
Oh, that's a great question. Um, yeah, that's a great question. I think that I'll say that my Jamaicanness has always been a major part of me. So
Mm,
while I was born in London, I grew up partially in Jamaica for a couple of years when I was in my youth, and then I came back to
mm,
London. Um, yeah, that's a great question. I think first and foremost, I guess before my Jamaicanness, because I'm very visibly black, I
mhm,
think that's the first assumption, or like that my color is what people
mm,
notice before they know anything else about me.
yeah.
Um, I found moving here, it's been interesting because people don't expect me to sound the way I do. Because
Mm,
most other black people are either Canadians or they might have moved from Africa or the Caribbean or even
mm,
America, and so I do notice, if I'm honest, a certain privilege that comes from being from England and having a British accent. I think
mm,
is cute, which I question that, but I think that's been kind of interesting. I think moving here as well, I've strongly had the newcomer perspective. So what it's like to integrate into Canada, as
mhm,
someone who doesn't have Canadian experience, and without that experience, getting a job while moving here was very difficult.
mhm,
Because international experience is not in any way seen as relevant as like Canadian experience. Uh,
mhm,
and I've seen myself struggle, but I've seen a lot of different people struggle. Newcomers who come to Canada and find it difficult
mm,
to kind of settle in and get a job. Um,
mm,
but I don't know. I think it's been an interesting experience. If I'm honest, I think that growing up in London, I grew up in firstly a predominantly black neighborhood, and then a
mm,
neighborhood that was quite multicultural, but with fewer black people. And so I
mhm,
got used to being the only black person in spaces. Uh,
mhm.
and that's continued to some extent in Toronto, at least for the most part in the workplace. It tends to be quite. I've tended to be in the minority for sure.
Yeah. Very interesting. I, just to shift a little bit here, and I know we're talking about so many topics, but for many who may not know, I mean, professionally, you have received many accolades. I mean, if you were to Google your name, you've been nominated the top 100 women. You've had just a lot of professional success. You've been interviewed on multiple platforms. And you mentioned, of course, what has really served you in terms of your own wellness, which is the priority. But professionally, and not and professionally, how do you hold space for other Black women?
Yeah.
Because as you mentioned in Toronto, it sounds like as an outsider, it seems the workplace is rife with just challenges. So how do you, in your position of influence as a manager, and you mentioned the constant workplace racism you experience, folks don't think that you're a manager. How are you creating pathways for other Black women who may not be in management, but who see you and finally see themselves represented and what can be done?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. I think about this a lot, and I think particularly once I got into a management role, when I realized I had um, a little bit more power and ability to influence in management rather than in being in non-management and more junior roles. I've
Mm-hmm.
thought a lot about that. So I'd say that in the workplace, I do it in a number of ways. So first things first, I tend to mentor. I mentor a number of young women, black and women of color in the workplace, and I've done that. I've done that quite consistently since I started being in management roles. When I hire, I really do try to put diversity first. My question is always, can you do the job? And then, um, like, what diverse opinions and backgrounds and lived experiences can you bring to the role as well? Rather
Mm-hmm.
than it being kind of the secondary thing that people look at, I tend to think of it first and foremost. And that has led me to hire people who are exceptional Black women.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope to do more of that. Um, I think as well, I found that in my job at the university before, when I used to work at the career center, we had no programming specifically for Black students. And we do occasional events here or there, but in terms of kind of longer term programming, that didn't exist. And so I was really keen to put something in place. And just before I left the Career Center, I was able to replicate a program. There was a career development program that I had been through when I was 18 in London that was run by a charity called the Windsor Fellowship. And it was really pivotal to my success. It taught me how to interview. It gave me a mentor. It helped me understand how to navigate the workplace. And so I created a version of that program called Race Forward here in Toronto at Toronto Metropolitan University. And to this day, that program still continues. It's specifically for Black undergraduate students. And I think each year about 20 to 30 students take it with the idea that over the summer, they really end up building up their leadership skills, but also their career skills. And then finally, wherever I can, I try to volunteer to support Black women. So I'm part of the strategic advisory committee of an organization called Accelerate Her Future, which is a fantastic career accelerator organization that helps women of color who want to go into business tech build. And so I've been part of that for about 2 or 3 years now.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. So tell us the name of the hiking nonprofit again.
Let's Hike T.O.
Let's Hike to Okay, that's right.
Yep.
So you're now not as involved in the day-to-day, but folks can still, if they want to see you, especially after listening to this episode, you still do lead hikes?
Yes, I still lead hikes. All this means is that whenever you email, it's not me specifically.
Okay, gotcha.
Email, answering every Instagram message, posting on Instagram. I'm kind of not doing every single thing. I'm still very involved. So I'm a board member and the board meets once a month. And then I lead a number of hikes a year. So I've led 2 actually since January, and I'm sure I'll be leading more in the future.
Okay, gotcha. That's awesome. Yeah, that's amazing to hear the program that you created is still operating. I mean, that's huge. To have a really structured program like that is so vital because often we don't get access to such programs, or when there are, they're incredibly highly competitive that there's only, a few people that can access it. So that's wonderful to hear that what you created is still flourishing.
Yeah, and I'm always, if I'm honest, thinking about what more can I do. I'm always wondering what additional support can I provide and how can I open up doors and use my position to support Black women.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You have a lot you're balancing. I mean, as we're talking more, as I'm hearing, it's like you have your full-time job, but you're creating all these pathways for other Black women. You are still leading hikes. You have your investment business. This is a lot. And you're engaged, so you're going to be getting there. You have a lot on your plate, and that's a lot. I'm saying that because it seems to be so common for a lot of us Black women that we just
wearing all these hats.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And I pose this question to myself is how it's not that we're demonizing that, but we think about wearing multiple hats. Is that a sustainable life course pathway? And I'm asking myself these questions of, and it seems like you're starting to, you're leading hikes, but you're not answering all the emails. You're not doing all, posting, social media, marketing, management. But how do you think Black women can, it's just, we want to live a long life, and wearing all these hats, I just sometimes wonder if it's counterproductive to that outcome.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I will say for myself, I've chosen to wear all of these hats. So it's very much been something I've gone after opportunities that really inspire me and make me feel excited. So I have chosen them, and oddly, I do quite like to have a number of different things I'm juggling at one time, but obviously not to the point where it feels exhausting. I think what's incredibly important is just for everyone to have an idea of where they have choice, because in many ways, we all have responsibilities that aren't things that we might choose, whether it's caregiving for our parents or, relatives, or, if you're a mother, there's so much caregiving there and so much time and love that takes. And then realizing what brings you joy and for you, what that looks like. I found that for myself, I've consistently gone into spaces that there are so few Black people, and I've always wanted to change that. And every time I've gone into a space like that, I've been like, how do I change this? How do I basically take over, not for myself, but for others to come in so they can experience this as well? And so I've taken those opportunities, but I've had to be realistic with myself in terms of how involved can I be in everything that I want to get involved in? And I do say no, you know. There's been a few times over the past year where I've been asked to join boards, and I've said no. I just don't have the time, and I can only take opportunities that I truly feel excited and inspired by. So that's something I'm super conscious of. And I think recently I've noticed that a number of Black women in my life have spoken about being so tired.
Yeah.
Phrase of, I'm so tired, and I think it's really difficult when it gets to that point.
Yeah.
You know? And as for me personally, I always look at what can I scale back and what can I stop doing? Right. Or also for myself, how can I use my time a little bit better? Like, I don't need to spend an hour scrolling through Instagram in the mornings when I wake up. I could probably be using that time maybe to go on a walk or to develop myself in a way that might be a bit more helpful.
Yeah. How else do you think we can bridge the divide? I mean, as we're hearing you talk, you know, being a Jamaican from London, as you live in Toronto, you are expressing such common elements that many Black women, regardless of their geographic location, can connect with and resonate. Yet we often think that, okay, if you're a Black woman in the Caribbean, that's a different experience. If you're a Black woman in the continent of Africa, wherever you are, East, West, you know, Southern, that it's a different experience. But in talking with you, it seems like there's much more of a divide that we can share versus it being, you know, isolated. You know, of course, we have respect that there will be nuances to the US that are different from Toronto, different from London, et cetera. But how do you think we can bridge this geographic location and create more global Black women's wellness? Because you and I, we talked about, we're hearing a lot of Black women say we're tired, we're overwhelmed, we have a lot on our plate. What do you think are some practical things that, you know, for those who are listening as they sit with this and they question, that we can do wherever we occupy?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there are a couple of things that we can do. Firstly, I think Black women, like as best as possible, when Black women stick together, it's such a powerful experience. You know, when they look out for each other, when they support each other where they can. I'm part of this incredible group on Facebook, and it's thousands of women in and around the Greater Toronto area, and people are constantly posting, oh, I'm in need of this, or where can I find like a Black electrician, or where can I find someone to do my hair, short notice, or I've just started my own business. Can people support if they're interested in my products? And it's really been an incredible experience to see Black women show up for each other. And so I think continuously creating opportunities or groups like that locally. And then I think as best as possible, sharing stories where we see Black women thriving and doing amazing, amazing things, I think is incredible. I would love to see, particularly there are some incredible Black outdoors groups in the States. And you folks are like killing it in the diversity outdoors community. I've never seen anything like it. There are a few in Toronto and Canada. And we're having an event to bring them together, to bring the diversity outdoors leaders together, because I think we can take over the world once we come together. But when I've looked online and seen what's happening in the States, there are some incredible groups. And I would love at some point for us to, even if it is just getting on a Zoom call, that would be even better, coming together in person, just to share experiences, just to make sure that for anyone who wants to start a group like this, they don't have to go through all of the hurdles that we went through. I think that would be just amazing. And so I guess the big thing is community, building that community if you don't see it. Or if it is there, just being part of it and trying to lift others up rather than feeling like in any way we're in competition with each other.
Right, exactly. Oh, I love that. I love what you're saying. When Black women show up and support other Black women, that the synergy is just like you said, we can do anything. And that's how we do that. It's amazing.
And
Uh,
I think we all have skills, we all have areas of knowledge, and often we downplay them, specifically
yeah,
Black
yeah,
women. That doesn't matter. I guess everyone, I'm sure, knows how to, you know, I don't know, be like amazing on social media or be
right,
a great
right,
public speaker or fill in the blank or be an amazing artist.
right.
But often we don't all know that, and I think when we kind of bring those skills and those areas of expertise together, we hold so much power.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. This is great. Kumar, we could talk forever. I love this. There's so many other avenues that, we could get into. But what are your closing words of just wisdom, of advice, of affirmation that you want to share with our audience and listeners? Especially, we're excited that you're going to share this episode with your network. So we can see the diaspora of commonality and just the bridging of different countries and cultures.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think my closing words are that as Black women, 100%, we face struggles every day
Mm,
in our lives, and that can be incredibly difficult.
mm,
But there is such resilience that we have and such power that we have
mm,
that I think we together can utilize for so much good. And I just say that for me in the outdoors community here in Toronto, I had to create something because I didn't see it. And
mm.
I just hope for everyone else listening, if you enter spaces where you don't see yourself represented, if you have the time and energy, it's always amazing to open those doors to ensure that other people have the opportunity to come through. Um, so let's look after ourselves 100%
Mhm.
where we can, where we have the time or the ability. Let's just open up doors for other Black women. So I think that makes such a huge difference.
Yes, let's open doors for other Black women. Love it. We won't stop right there because that's I love that. Kamara, where can folks reach you? I'm sure they'll want to follow you. How can they connect and build community with you?
Yeah, so I guess the best way is probably LinkedIn. Drop me a note and
Okay.
say that you've heard me on the podcast and let me know if you want to connect in some way. For Let's Hike T.O, for anyone based in Toronto or visiting Toronto, I encourage you to follow us on Instagram and Facebook. On Instagram, we're Let's Hike T.O, and on Facebook, we're Let's Hike Toronto. And you can find out when our next hikes are coming up. And then if you see my name, that means I'm leading the hike. Otherwise, go on the other hikes as well because we're equally amazing. We've got some
Yeah,
fantastic leaders. And in fact, we have the hike coming up quite soon for Black History Month, which is going to be amazing and pretty special. So that's what I would say. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Otherwise, follow the group on Facebook or Instagram.
wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for being here, Kamara. This has been a great episode. And thank you all for listening to this episode of the Black Women's Wellness Podcast. Continue to check out our upcoming bi-weekly episodes. Subscribe, follow, and like, and connect with us on our website at thebwwa.com. We want to support Black women who are stressed, burnt out, and overwhelmed. And we invite you to donate to the Black Women's Wellness Agency on our website, thebwwa.com/about, and you can click on the donate button. We love engaging with you in our community. So leave us a message. Let us know what resonates from our conversation with Kamara, what points you want to challenge, what really speaks to you. We're active on Instagram. Our handle is the THEBWWAINC. And until next time, remember that our wellness is infinite. Stay well, take care. Bye, everyone.